different miserable conditions pertaining to providence. Other providence means to what is, uh, in other words, what is our karma, and other living entities or the body and mind. Still, they must remain conditioned by the laws of nature, despite all attempts to counter these laws. Purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. Just as a dog wanders here and there for a piece of bread or punishment, the living entity perpetually wanders about trying to be happy and planning in so many ways to counteract material misery. This is called the struggle for existence. We can actually see in our daily lives how we are forced to make plans to drive away miserable conditions. To get rid of one miserable condition, we have to put ourselves in another kind of miserable condition. A poor man suffers for want of money, but if he wants to become rich, he has to struggle in so many ways. Actually, that is not a valid counteracting process, but a snare, meaning an entanglement of the illusory energy. If one does not endeavor to counteract his situation, but is satisfied with his position, knowing that he has obtained his position through past activities, he can instead engage his energies in developing Krishna consciousness. This is recommended in all Vedic literatures. Tasyaiva heto prayate ta kovido na labdyate yad rama matam upari ada. Tau labdyate dukha vad anyatad sukham kalena sarvatra gavira ramasa. Persons who are actually intelligent and philosophically inclined should endeavor only for the purposeful end, which is not obtainable even by wandering from the topmost planet, Brahmaloka, down to the lowest planet, Patala. As far as happiness derived from sense enjoyment is concerned, it can be obtained automatically in course of time, just as in course of time we obtain miseries even though we do not desire them. Bhagavad Gita 1.5.18. One should simply try to develop his Krishna consciousness and not waste time trying to improve his material condition. Actually, the material condition cannot be improved. The process of improvement means accepting another miserable condition. However, if we endeavor to improve our Krishna consciousness, the distresses of material life will disappear without extraneous endeavor. Krishna therefore promises, Kuntiya pratijani name bhakta pranasyati. O son of Kunti, declare it boldly that my devotee never perishes. Bhagavad Gita 9:31. One who takes to the path of devotional service will never be vanquished, despite all miseries of the body and mind, and despite all misery brought about by other living entities and providence, miseries which are beyond our control. Text 33. A man may carry a burden on his head, and when he feels it to be too heavy, he sometimes gives relief to his head by putting the burden on his shoulder. In this way, he tries to relieve himself of the burden. However, whatever process he devises to counteract the burden does nothing more than put the same burden from one place to another. Very interesting verse. Purport. This is a good description of an attempt to transfer a burden from one place to another. When one gets tired of keeping a burden on his head, he will place it on his shoulder. This does not mean that he has become free from the strains of carrying the burden. Similarly, human society, in the name of civilization, is creating one kind of trouble to avoid another kind of trouble. In contemporary civilization, we see that there are many automobiles manufactured to carry us swiftly from one place to another. But at the same time, we have created other problems. We have to construct so many roads, and yet these roads are insufficient to cope with automobile congestion and traffic jams. There are also the problems of air pollution and storage and fuel storage. Yes. The conclusion is that the process we manufacture to counteract or minimize our distresses do not actually put an end to our pains. It is all simply illusion. We simply place the burden from the head to the shoulder. The only real way we can minimize our problems is to surrender unto the Supreme Personality of Godhead and give ourselves up to his protection. The Lord, being all powerful, can make arrangements to mitigate our painful life in material existence. The Lord, being all powerful, can make arrangements to mitigate our painful life in material existence. Text 34. Narada continued, O you who are free from all sinful activity, no one can counteract the effects of fruitive activity simply by manufacturing a different activity devoid of Krishna consciousness. All such activity is due to our ignorance. When we have a troublesome dream, we cannot relieve it with a troublesome hallucination. One can counteract a dream only by awaking. Similarly, our material existence is due to our ignorance and illusion. Unless we awaken to Krishna consciousness, we cannot be relieved of such dreams. For the ultimate solution to all problems, we must awaken to Krishna consciousness. In other words, we have to become Krishna conscious. Purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. There are two kinds of fruitive activity. We can place the burden on the head, or we can place it on the shoulder. Actually, keeping the burden in either place is the same. The transferal, however, is taking place under the name of counteraction. In this connection, Prahlad Maharaj said that fools and rascals in the material world plan so in the world plan so grossly for bodily comfort without knowing that such arrangements, even if successful, are only Maya. People are working hard day and night for the illusory happiness of the body. This is not a way to achieve happiness. One has to get out of this material entanglement and return home back to Godhead. That is real happiness. The Vedas therefore enjoin, don't remain in the darkness of this material world. Go to the lights of the spiritual world. To counteract the distress of this material body, one has to take on another distressed condition. Both situations are only illusion. There is no gain in taking on one trouble to counteract another trouble. The conclusion is that one cannot be perpetually happy as long as one exists in this material world. The only remedy is to get out of this material world altogether and return home, back to Godhead. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Rama Ram. Text 35. Sometimes we suffer because we see a tiger in a dream or a snake in vision and in a vision. But actually, there is neither a tiger nor a snake. Thus, we create some situation in a subtle form and suffer the consequences. These sufferings cannot be mitigated unless we are awakened from our dream. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. As stated in the Vedas, the living entity is always separate from two kinds of material bodies, the subtle and the gross. All our sufferings are due to these material bodies. This is explained in Bhagavad Gita 2.14. Matra sparsas tu konteya sitosna sukadukadaha agama payano nityas tamstadikshasva bharata. O son of Kunti, the non-permanent appearance of happiness and distress and their disappearance in due course are like the appearance and disappearance of winter and summer seasons. They arise from sense perception, O Skyan of Bharata, and one must learn to tolerate them without being disturbed. Very important statement. One must learn to tolerate them without being disturbed. Lord Krishna thus informed Arjuna that all the distresses brought about by the body come and go. One has to learn how to tolerate them. Material existence is the cause of all our sufferings. For we do not suffer once we are out of the material condition. The Vedas therefore enjoin that one should factually understand that he is not material, but is actually Brahman, Aham Brahmasmi. This understanding cannot be fully realized unless one is engaged in Brahman activities, namely devotional service. To get free from the material conditions, one has to take the Krishna consciousness. That is the only remedy. Haribol. Okay, then Krishna consciousness is the only remedy to all the suffering and misery of this material world. The real interest of the living entity is to get out of the nescience or ignorance that causes him to endure repeated birth and death. The only remedy is to surrender unto the Supreme Personality of Godhead through his representative, in other words, the Guru. Unless one renders devotional service unto the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Vasudeva, one cannot possibly become completely detached from this material world, nor can he possibly manifest real knowledge. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. This is the way to become detached from the artificial material condition. The only remedy is to take to Krishna consciousness and constantly engage in the devotional service of Lord Vasudeva, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Everyone is trying to be happy, and the process adopted to achieve that happiness is called self-interest. Unfortunately, the conditioned soul hovering within this material world does not know that his ultimate goal of self-interest is Vasudeva, meaning Krishna. Samsriti, or material existence, begins with the illusioned bodily conception of life. And on the basis of this conception, there ensues a series of unwanted things called anarthas. These unwanted things are actually mental desires for various types of sense gratification. In this way, one accepts different types of bodies within this material world. One first has to control the mind so that the desires of the mind can be purified. This process is described in the Narada Pancharatra as Sarvapadi Vinirmuktam Tat Paratvena Nirmalam. Unless one purifies his mind, there is no question of getting free from the material condition. As stated in Bhagavatam, in Srimad Bhagavatam 1.7.6, Ananta Pasamam Sakshat Bhakti Yogam Ahoksaje Lokas Janato Vidvans Chakre Satvata Samhitam. The material miseries of the living entity, which are superfluous to him, in other words, unnecessarily undertaken by him, can be directly mitigated by the linking process of devotional service. Linking to what? Linking to Krishna. But the mass of people do not know this, and therefore the learned Vyasadeva compiled the Vedic literature, which is in relation to the supreme truth. Anarthas, unwanted things, come down from the bodily life to another. Come down from one bodily life to another. To get out of this entanglement, one has to take the devotional service of Lord Vasudeva, Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The word guru is significant in this connection. The word guru may be translated as heavy or the supreme. In other words, the guru is the spiritual master. Srila Rishabha Deva advised his sons, Guru na sasyat na mochayet ya samaveta mrityum. One should not take up the post of spiritual master unless he is able to lead his disciple from the cycle of birth and death. Yeah, you don't want to be a phony claiming to be, let's say, some kind of a miracle man, but not being able to liberate someone from the cycle of birth and death. That's why it says one should not take up the post of a spiritual master unless he is able to lead his disciple from the cycle of birth and death. Srimad Bhagavatam 5.5.18. Material existence is actually a chain of action and reaction brought about by different types of fruitive activities. This is the cause of birth and death. One can stop this process only by engaging oneself in the service of Vasudeva, meaning Krishna. Bhakti refers to these activities performed in the service of Lord Vasudeva. Because Lord Vasudeva is the supreme, one should engage oneself in his service, not in the service of the demigods. Devotional service begins from the neophyte stage, the stage of observing the rules and regulations. Yeah, that's the beginning of spiritual life. And extends to the point of spontaneous, loving service to the Lord. Very important. The purpose of all stages is to satisfy Lord Vasudeva, meaning Krishna. When one is perfectly advanced in the devotional service of Vasudeva, one becomes completely detached from the service of the body. That is, his designated position in material existence. After becoming so detached, one becomes actually perfect in knowledge and engages perfectly in the service of Lord Vasudeva. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu says, Jivira Swarupahaya Krishnera Nityadasa. Every living entity is, by constitutional position, an eternal servant of Krishna. As soon as one engages in the service of Lord Vasudeva, he attains his normal constitutional position. The position is called the liberated stage. Muktir hitmanyata rupam swarupena vivastiti. In the liberated stage, one is situated in his original Krishna conscious position. He gives up all engagements in the service of matter, engagements concocted under the names of social service, national service, community service, dog service, automobile service, and so many other services conducted under the illusion of I and mine. As explained in the second chapter of the first canto, Vasudeva Bhagavati, Bhakti Yoga Prayojita, Janayat Yasu Vairagyam Jnanam Chayat Ahaitukam. By rendering devotional service unto the personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna, one immediately acquires causeless knowledge and detachment from the world. Bhagavad Gita 1.2.7. Thus, one must engage in the service of Vasudeva without material desire, mental speculation, or fruitive activity. That's what we learn in Krishna consciousness. Pure devotional service without material desire, mental speculation, or fruitive activity. Text 38. O best of kings, one who is faithful, who is always hearing the glories of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is always engaged in the culture of Krishna consciousness and in hearing the Lord's activities, very soon becomes eligible to see the Supreme Personality of Godhead face to face. So when it says here, who is always engaged in the culture of Krishna consciousness, what is the culture of Krishna consciousness? It is always being engaged in devotional service without any material desire. The only desire of the devotee is to please Krishna. And he can only do that if he's completely surrendered to Krishna and engaged always in devotional service. Purport by Srila Prabhupada, constant engagement in the transcendental loving service of Vasudeva means constantly hearing the glories of the Lord. The principles of Bhakti Yoga, Shravanam Kirtanam Vishnu Smaranam, Pada Sevanam, Archanam, Vandanam, Dasyam Sakyam Atmanivedanam, are the only means by which perfection can be attained. Simply by hearing of the glories of the Lord, one is elevated to the transcendental position. Okay. Text 39 and 40. My dear king, in the place where pure devotees live, following the rules and regulations, and thus purely conscious and engaged in great eagerness in hearing and chanting the glories of the Supreme Personality Godhead, in that place, if one gets a chance to hear their constant flow of nectar, which is exactly like the waves of a river, one will forget the necessities of life, namely hunger and thirst, and become immune to all kinds of fear, lamentation, and illusion. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. The cultivation of Krishna consciousness is possible where great devotees live together and constantly engage in hearing and chanting the glories of the Lord. Yeah, in other words, when you live in the uh, uh, in the ashram of Krishna consciousness, you will constantly engage in hearing and chanting the glories of the Lord. In a holy place like Vrindavana, there are many devotees constantly engaged in chanting and hearing the glories of the Lord. If one gets the chance to hear from pure devotees in such a place, allowing the constant flow of the river of nectar to come from the mouths of pure devotees, then the cultivation of Krishna consciousness becomes very easy. When one is engaged in constantly hearing the glories of the Lord, he certainly rises above the bodily conception, fear, lamentation, and illusion. But when one is engaged in hearing and chanting the glories of the Lord, he transcends the bodily conception. The word Bhagavat Gunanukatana Shravana Vyagra Chetasa, meaning always eager to find the place where the glories of the Lord are being heard and chanted, is significant in this verse. A businessman is always very eager to go to a place where business is transacted. Similarly, A devotee is very eager to hear from the lips of liberated devotees. Similarly, as soon as one hears the glories of the Lord from the liberated devotees, he immediately becomes impregnated with Krishna consciousness. This is also confirmed in another verse. Satam prasangan mama virya samido bhavanti karna rasayana kata tajjoshanad asvapavarga vartamani shradar ratir bhaktir anukramisyati. In the association of pure devotees, discussion of the pastimes and activities of the Supreme Personality of Godhead is very pleasing and satisfying to the ear and to the heart. By cultivating such knowledge, one gradually becomes advanced in the path of liberation, and thereafter he is freed from his attraction, thereafter he is free, and his attraction becomes fixed. Then real devotion and devotional service begin. Srimad Bhagavatam 3.25.25. In the association of pure devotees, one becomes attached to hearing and chanting the glories of the Lord. In this way, one can cultivate Krishna consciousness. And as soon as this cultivation is advanced, one can become faithful to the Lord, devoted to the Lord, and attached to the Lord. And thus, one can very quickly attain full Krishna consciousness. The secret of success in the cultivation of Krishna consciousness is hearing from the right person. A Krishna consciousness person is never disturbed by the bodily necessities, namely eating, sleeping, mating, and defending. Okay, the secret of success in the cultivation of Krishna consciousness is hearing from the right person. A Krishna conscious person is never disturbed by the bodily necessities, namely eating, sleeping, mating, and defending. Text 41. Because the conditioned soul is always disturbed by the bodily necessities, such as hunger and thirst, he has very little time to cultivate attachment to hearing the nectarian words of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. That's a fact. We become so entangled in Maya that we don't have time to hear anything about Krishna. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. Unless one is associated with devotees, he cannot cultivate Krishna consciousness. Nirjana bhajana, cultivating Krishna consciousness in a solitary place, is not possible for the neophyte. Don't even think of doing it. For he will be disturbed by the bodily necessities, eating, sleeping, mating, and defending. Being so disturbed, one cannot cultivate Krishna consciousness. We therefore see, that devotees known as Sahaja, who make everything seem very easy, do not associate with advanced devotees. They think they know everything. Such persons, in the name of devotional activities, are addicted to all kinds of sinful acts: illicit sex, intoxication, gambling, and meat eating. There are many so-called devotees passing themselves off as devotees while engaging in these sinful activities. In other words, one who is influenced by sinful activity cannot be accepted as a person in Krishna consciousness. A person addicted to sinful life cannot develop Krishna consciousness as indicated in this verse. Text 42 through 44. The most powerful Lord Brahma, the father of all progenitors, Lord Shiva, Manu, Daksha, and the other rulers of humankind, the four saintly first-class brahmacharis headed by Sanaka and Sanatana, the great sages Marichi, Atri, Angira, Pulastya, Pulaha, Ratu, Rigu, and Vasista, and my humble self, Narada, are all stalwart brahmanas who can speak authoritatively on Vedic literature. We are very powerful because of austerities, meditation, and education. Nonetheless, even after inquiring about the Supreme Personality of Godhead, whom we always see, we do not know perfectly about him. Well, how can you? Krishna has, as soon as you think you know everything, Krishna expands himself. And therefore, you have to, again, meditate on Krishna. In other words, there is this competition between uh, uh, what's called the competition is called, and you are able to understand Krishna consciousness, and right away Krishna expands himself, and you have to again learn more about Krishna. Therefore, it is an eternal process of hearing and chanting. One never comes to the end of it. That is real Krishna consciousness. So let's see what it says in the purport. According to the foolish Darwinian theory of the anthropologist, it is said that 40,000 years ago, Homo sapiens had not appeared on this planet. That's a false statement, because the process of evolution had not yet reached that point. However, the Vedic histories, the Puranas and Mahabharata, relate human histories that extended millions and millions of years in the past. In the beginning of creation, there was a very intelligent personality, Lord Brahma. Lord Brahma is the most exalted personality. And from him emanated all the Manus and the brahmacharis like Sanaka and Sanatana, as well as Lord Shiva, the great sages, and Narada. All these personalities underwent great austerities and penances, and thus became authorities in Vedic knowledge. Perfect knowledge for human beings, as well as all living entities, is contained in the Vedas. All the above mentioned great personalities are not only powerful, being cognizant of the past, present, and future, but are also devotees. Still, in spite of their great education and knowledge, and despite their meeting the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Lord Vishnu, They cannot actually understand the perfection of the living entity's relationship with Lord Vishnu. This means that these personalities are still limited as far as their knowledge of the unlimited is concerned. Well, that makes sense. If you're limited and you're trying to understand the unlimited, you will not come to any, let's say, final realization. Is that bad? No, it just proves that we are not equal to Krishna. Therefore, we have to continually learn more and more about the Lord. The conclusion is that simply by advancing one's knowledge, one cannot be accepted as an expert in understanding the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The Supreme Personality of Godhead can be understood not by advanced knowledge. So academia is not the way to know Krishna, but by pure devotional service, as confirmed in Bhagavad Gita 1855, Bhaktya Mam Abhijanati Yavan Yaschasmi Tattvata. Unless one takes to pure transcendental devotional service, he cannot understand the Supreme Personality of Godhead in truth. Everyone has some imperfect ideas about the Lord. So-called scientists and philosophers and philosophical speculators are unable to understand the Supreme Lord by virtue of their knowledge. Knowledge is not perfect unless one comes to the platform of devotional service. This is confirmed by the Vedic version. Atapite deva padambuja dvaya prasada lesan grihita evahi chanati tatvam bhagavan mahim no nachanya eko pichiram vichinvan. Bhagavatam 10:14-29. The speculators, the Gyanis, go on speculating about the Supreme Personality of Godhead for many, many hundreds of thousands of years. But unless one is favored by the Supreme Personality of Godhead, one cannot understand his supreme glories. All the great sages mentioned in this verse have their planets near Brahmaloka. Sanaka, Sanatana, Sanandana, and Sanat Kumara. These sages reside in different stars known as the southern stars, which circle the pole star. The pole star, called Dhruva Loka, is the pivot of this universe, and all planets move around this pole star. All the stars are planets as far as we can see within this one universe. According to Western theory, all the stars are different suns. But according to Vedic information, there is only one sun within this universe. All the so-called stars are but different planets. Besides this universe, there are many millions of other universes, and each of them contains similar innumerable stars and planets. Despite the cultivation of Vedic knowledge, which is unlimited, and the worship of different demigods by the symptoms of Vedic mantras, demigod worship does not help one to understand the supreme, powerful personality of Godhead. Purport by Srila Prabhupada, as stated in Bhagavad Gita 7.20. Kamaisthaistarshrita jnana prapadyante niya devata tam tam niyamam astaya prakriti niyatak swaya. Those whose minds are distorted by material desires surrender unto demigods and follow the particular rules and regulations of worship according to their own natures. Most people are interested in worshiping demigods to acquire powers. Each demigod has a particular power. For instance, the demigod Indra, the king of heaven, has power to shower rain on the surface of the globe, to give sufficient vegetation to the earth. This demigod is described in the Vedas Vajra Hasta Purandara Indriya. Indra rules the water supply with a thunderbolt in his hand. The thunderbolt itself is controlled by Indra. Similarly, other demigods, Agni, Varuna, Chandra, Surya, have particular powers. All these demigods are worshipped in the Vedic hymns through symbolic weapon. All these demigods are worshipped in the Vedic hymns through a symbolic weapon. Therefore, it is said here, Mantralingar Vyavachinam. By such worship, karmis may obtain the benediction of material opulence in the form of animals, riches, beautiful wives, many followers, and so on. By such material opulence, however, one cannot understand the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Wow, that's a wake-up call right there. Let me read that again. Therefore, it is said here, Mantralingar Vyavat Chinam. By such worship, karmis may obtain the benediction of material opulence in the form of animals, riches, beautiful wives, many followers, and so on. By such material opulence, however, one cannot understand the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Okay. So, how can we understand the Supreme Personality of Godhead? We have to surrender to the Lord. It's not how much wealth, how much, let's say, fame we have, but it's how much we're surrendered to the Lord that counts. When a person is fully engaged in devotional service, he is favored by the Lord, who bestows his causeless mercy. At such a time, the awakened devotee gives up all material activities and ritualistic performances mentioned in the Vedas. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. In the previous verse, those who are in knowledge have been described as unable to appreciate the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Similarly, this verse indicates that those who are followers of the Vedic rituals, as well as those who are followers of the fruitive activities, are unable to see the Supreme Personality of Godhead. In these two verses, both the karmis and the jnanis are described as unfit to understand him, as described by Srila Rupa Goswami. Only when one is completely free from mental speculation and fruitive activity, anya vilasita sunyam jnana karmadi anavritam, can one engage in pure devotional service without being polluted by material desires. The significant word atma bhavita indicates that the Lord is awakened in one's mind if one constantly thinks of him. A pure devotee is always thinking of the lotus feet of the Lord. Savai mana Krishna padara vindayo. A pure devotee cannot remain a moment without being absorbed in thoughts of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. This constant thinking of the Lord is described in Bhagavad Gita as satata yuktanam, always engaging in the Lord's service. Vachatam pratipurvakam, this is devotional service in love and affection. Because the Supreme Personality of Godhead dictates to the pure devotee from within, the devotee is saved from all material activities. Even the Vedic ritualistic ceremonies are considered material activities because by such activities, one is simply elevated to other planetary systems, the residential abodes of the demigods. Lord Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita 9:25, Yanti Deva Vratan Devan Pitrin Yanti Pritrivrata Bhutani Yanti Bhuteja Yanti Mad Yajino Pimam. Those who worship the demigods will take birth among the demigods. Those who worship the ghosts and spirits will take birth among such beings. Those who worship ancestors go to the ancestors, and those who worship me will live with me. The word Atma Bhavita also indicates that a devotee is always engaged in preaching to deliver conditioned souls. It is said of the 6 Goswamis, Nana Shastra Vicharaneka Nipuno Sadharma Samstapako Lokanam Hitakarino. A pure devotee of the Supreme Personality of Godhead is always thinking of how fallen, conditioned souls can be delivered. The Supreme Personality of Godhead, influenced by merciful devotees, attempt to deliver fallen souls, enlightens the people in general from within by his causeless mercy. If a devotee is blessed by another devotee, he becomes free from karma kanda and jnana kanda activities. As confirmed in Brahma Samhita, Vedesu Durlabham, the Supreme Personality of Godhead cannot be realized through karma kanda and jnana kanda. Adurlabham Atma Bhakto, the Lord is realized only by a sincere devotee, meaning a devotee who has no material desires to attain. The devotee simply is interested in pleasing the Lord by devotional service and glorifying the transcendental qualities of the Lord. He's not interested in anything else. This material world, the cosmic manifestation, is created by the Supreme Personality of God. And the living entities have come here to enjoy themselves. The Vedic instructions guide them according to different regulative principles. And intelligent people take advantage of these instructions. They thus enjoy material life without being disturbed. This is actually illusion. And to get out of this illusion by one's own endeavor is very difficult. The general populace, in other words, the general people, are engaged in material activities. And when people are a little advanced, they become attracted by the ritualistic ceremonies mentioned in the Vedas. he again comes to the material activities. Yeah, because those ritualistic activities are for gain and safety. It's not meant to please Krishna. It's to it's to have gain and safety to continue sense gratification. In this way, both the followers of the Vedic rituals and the followers of material activities are entangled in conditional life. Now, that is a very important statement. Let me read that again. In this way, both the followers of the Vedic rituals and the followers of material activities are entangled in conditional life. These people get the seed of devotional service only by the goodwill of the Guru and Krishna. This is confirmed in Chaitanya Charitamrita. Guru Krishna Prasade Paya Bhakti Lata Bhakti Bija. Confirmed in Chaitanya Charitamrita. I'm sorry. When one is engaged in devotional service, he is no longer attracted to material activities. When a man is covered by different designations, he cannot engage in devotional service. So, what are different designations? I am let's say, a devotee who is a servant of my family. Well, that is being covered by different designations. He cannot engage in devotional service. One has to become freed from such designated activities. Sarvopadi vinirmuktam, and become pure in order to serve the Supreme Personality of Godhead through purified senses. So as long as we're engaged in serving family or in serving our nation or serving our dog, we cannot be pure in service. Hrishikesha, Hrishikena, Hrishikesha, Sevanam Bhakti Uchate. The service of the Lord through purified senses is called Bhakti Yoga, or devotional service. So, devotional service must be free from all attachments to or to anything mundane. The sincere devotee is always helped by the Supersoul, who resides within the heart of every living entity, as Lord Krishna confirms in Bhagavad Gita 10.10. In other words, when it says, Hrishikena Hrishikesha Sevanam Bhakti Uchite, the service of the Lord through purified senses is called Bhakti Yoga, or devotional service. Well, such a pure devotee doesn't go to baseball games or football games or basketball games or golf games, etc. He's not interested in that type of nonsense. He's not interested in going to the nightclub and drinking liquor and champagne and associating with prostitutes. He's not interested in any type of sense gratification, but he is interested anywhere where there is Krishna consciousness activity taking place. Tesam satata yuktanam bhajatam pritipurvakam dadami buddhi yogam tam yenamam upayanti te. This has been repeated many times in these purports. To those who are constantly devoted and worship me with love, I give the understanding by which they can come to me. This is the stage of becoming free from the contamination of material world. So, those who are constantly devoted and worship me with love, I give the understanding by which they come to me. So, this is not an academic, uh, what you would say, an academic process. This is a process of pure devotional service. Academia is not really significant in the process of Krishna consciousness. Surrender to the Lord is very, uh, let's say, necessary to begin to have a very intimate relationship with the Lord. Academia is for those people who are puffed up with their so-called mundane knowledge. But genuine surrender to the Lord through unlimited or uh, let's say, uninterrupted devotional service is the door that opens up one's ability to become a pure devotee. Those who are constantly devoted, very important, and worship me with love, very, very important. I give the understanding by which they can come to me. So this is not an academic process. This is the real relationship between the devotee and Krishna. At such a time, a devotee makes friends with another devotee, and his engagement in material activities ceases completely. Yeah, he gives up attachment to family, to mundane uh, activities, and mundane, let's say, philosophies, and he completely surrenders to to service of the Lord. At that time, he attains the favor of the Lord and loses his faith in material civilization, which begins with Varnashrama Dharma. So, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu speaks clearly of one's becoming liberated from the Varnashrama Dharma, the most exalted system of human civilization. At such a time, one feels himself to be perpetually the servant of Lord Krishna, a position taken by Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu himself. Naham vipro na cha narapatir napi vaishyo na sudro naham varni na cha griha patir no vana sto yatirva kintu prodyan nikila paramananda purnam ritab there Gopi Bhartu Padakamalayur Dasa Dasanu Dasa. Padavali 63. I am not a Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya, or Sudra. I am not a brahmachari, grihasta, vanaprastha, or sannyasi. What am I? I am the eternal servant of the servant of the servant of Lord Krishna. Through the disciplic succession, one can attain this conclusion, which is perfect elevation to the transcendental platform. Tasmat karmasu barhisman ajnanad artha kasisu martha dristim kritita sodra sparsas vasprista vastusu. My dear King Barhisman, you should never, out of ignorance, take to the Vedic rituals or to fruitive activity, which may be pleasing to hear about or which may appear to be the goal of self-interest. You should never take these to be the ultimate goal of life. Okay, my dear King Barhisman, you should never, out of ignorance, take to the Vedic rituals or to fruitive activity, which may be pleasing to hear about, or which may appear to be the goal of self interest. You should never take these to be the ultimate goal of life. Purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. Okay, we will stop there and pick up from this text 47 tomorrow. Are there any questions that anyone would like to ask? Any questions about what we have heard today?
Hare Krishna Guru Maharaj, quick question. This is
Yes,
Hari Priyadas.
Hare Krishna.
And Guru Maharaj, my question is, how do we know when a Vedic ritual gets introduced in devotional process in the future?
Say that again. How do we know?
Yeah, when a ritualistic activity gets introduced into with our devotional service in the future over time.
Okay, that's a good question. That's why it says here, those who are constantly devoted and worship me with love, I give the understanding by which they can come to me. This is the stage of becoming free from the contamination of the material world. At such a time, a devotee makes friends with another devotee, and his engagement in material activities ceases completely. At that time, he attains the favor of the Lord and loses his faith in material civilization, which begins with Varnashrama Dharma. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu speaks clearly of one's becoming liberated from the Varnashrama Dharma, the most exalted system of human civilization. At such a time, one feels himself to be perpetually the servant of Lord Krishna, a position taken by Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu himself. And Lord Chaitanya says, I am not a Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya, or Sudra. I am not a brahmachari, grihastha, vanaprastha, or sannyasa. What am I? I am the eternal servant of the servant of the servant of Lord Krishna. Through the disciplic succession, one can attain this conclusion, which is perfect elevation to the transcendental platform. Okay, so assuming any position of, let's say, achievement for having power and recognition and also adoration and ultimately sense gratification is rejected. That's why it says, I am not a Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya, or Sudra. I am not a brahmachari, grihastha, vanaprastha, or sannyasi. What am I? I am the eternal servant of the servant of the servant of Lord Krishna. Through the disciplic succession, one can attain this conclusion, which is perfect elevation to the transcendental platform. Okay, so Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu speaks clearly of one's becoming liberated from the Varnashrama Dharma, the most exalted system of human civilization. At such a time, one feels himself to be perpetually the servant of Lord Krishna, a position taken by Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu himself. So this seems to contradict everything we have been taught about Varnashram Dharma. However, even though Varnashram Dharma may be, and big maybe, stepping stone to engaging in Krishna conscious activities, still one must attain the favor of the Lord and loses his faith in material civilization, which begins with Varnashram Dharma. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu speaks clearly of one's becoming liberated from the Varnashram Dharma, the most exalted system of human civilization. At such a time, one feels himself to be perpetually the servant of Lord Krishna, a position taken by Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu himself, where he says, Naham Vipro Nacha Narapatir Napi Vaishyo Na Sudro. I am not a Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya, or Sudra. Well, that's the Varnashram system. I am not a brahmachari, grihastha, vanaprastha, or sannyasi. That is what you would think is Krishna consciousness. What am I? I am the eternal servant of the servant of the servant of Lord Krishna. Through the disciplic succession, one can attain this conclusion, which is perfect elevation to the transcendental platform. In other words, a devotee is not interested in any type of what you would call any type of position that is of being recognized as some kind of great authority. The devotee is satisfied being a humble devotee, completely surrendered to Guru and Krishna, and engaged in all kinds of devotional service without any desire for recognition or any type of sense gratification. So, such a platform is transcendental. When the devotee is free of all material desires, is not seeking to be recognized or glorified, and is just a humble devotee doing service without asking to be recognized or without any type of remuneration also. The devotee is simply satisfied by humble devotional service. Okay, so I think we'll stop right there. And if there are any questions, you can ask them now. The real important takeaway is Srimad Bhagavad Gita 10.10. Tesam satata yuktanam bhajatam pratipurvakam tadami buddhi yogam tam yena mam upayanti te. This is Bhagavad Gita 10.10. To those who are constantly devoted and worship me with love, I give the understanding by which they can come to me. So this is the real, let's say, qualification of a devotee, constantly devoted and worshiping Krishna with love. Then Krishna gives the understanding by which such devotees can come to him. This is the stage of becoming free from contamination of the material world. Number one, constantly devoted. And two, worship the Lord with love. Number three, then Krishna gives understanding by which they can come to him. So constantly devoted, worshiping the Lord with love, then one receives the understanding by which one can come to Krishna. And this is the stage of becoming free from the contamination of the material world. And at such a time, a devotee makes friends with another devotee, and his engagement in material activities ceases completely. At that time, he attains the favor of the Lord and loses his faith in material civilization, which begins with Varnashram Dharma. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu speaks clearly of one's becoming liberated from the Varnashram Dharma, which is considered the most exalted system of human civilization. At such a time, one feels himself to be perpetually the servant of Krishna, a position taken by Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu himself. So the real authority of Krishna consciousness is Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, who says, I am not a Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya, or Sudra. I am not a brahmachari, grihastha, vanaprastha, or sannyasi. What am I? I am the eternal servant of the servant of the servant of Lord Krishna. Through the disciplic succession, one can attain this conclusion, which is perfect elevation to the transcendental platform. In other words, a devotee is completely purified of any false identification and is perfectly satisfied in humble and regulated devotional service without any hiatus, without any stoppage for other mundane activities. He is engaged always in the surrendered position of a genuine devotee, satisfied by devotional service, not by anything else. Okay, so we will stop right there. Are there any questions? Any questions to for the what we have read today? The real important takeaway, like I said, is Bhagavad Gita 10.10. Tesam satatayuktanam bhajatam pratipurvakam tatami buddhi yogam tam yenamam upayanti te. To those who are constantly devoted and worship me with love, I give the understanding by which they can come to me. And it says, this is a stage of becoming free from the contamination of the material world. In other words, all mundane endeavors and identification. One gives up all mundane endeavors and all mundane identification. I am this, I am that, I have this, let's say, identification as a sannyasi or this or that. One gives up all these identifications and surrenders completely to Krishna through humble service, not asking for anything, but offering everything he can to the service of the Lord. And very significantly, it says, this is a stage of becoming free from the contamination of the two worlds. At such a time, a devotee makes friends with another devotee, and his engagement in material activities ceases completely. At that time, he attains the favor of the Lord and loses his faith in material civilization, which begins with Varnashram Dharma. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu speaks clearly of one's becoming liberated from the Varnashram Dharma, the most exalted system of human civilization. At such a time, one feels himself to be perpetually the servant of Lord Krishna, a position taken by Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu himself, where he says, I am not a Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya, or Sudra. I am not a brahmachari, grihastha, vanaprastha, or sannyasi. What am I? I am the eternal servant of the servant of the servant of Lord Krishna. Through the disciplic succession, one can attain this conclusion, which is perfect elevation to the transcendental platform. Okay? So we should be the servant of the servant of the servant of the servants of the servant of Krishna. And through the disciplic succession, one can attain this conclusion, which is perfect elevation. In other words, one is completely free from any false identification of oneself. One has no ulterior motive. The only desire of the devotee is to be constantly engaged in devotional service without wanting to be even recognized by having, let's say, uh, having what positions of power or positions of uh, that are coveted by other devotees. One devotee, the real devotee, is completely humble and meek and always engaged in devotional service without asking any recognition or remuneration. That is very important. Okay, thank you very much, my dear devotees. Please chant Hare Krishna with humility and without the desire to be lauded or to be what you would say, receiving recognition. Rather, the devotee remains very humble and meek and is satisfied by regulated devotional service, even if he is not recognized by anyone. He remains very satisfied by the service itself. He doesn't need anything else. He doesn't need recognition. He doesn't need remuneration. He doesn't need anything material to sustain his devotion, pure devotional service to Krishna.
Hare Krishna Maharaj.
Yes.
This is Adi Devdas.
Yes, Prabhu.
Maharaj, you said devotee is satisfied by his devotional service itself and don't need recognition. So what does it mean, Maharaj? Like
without recognition.
Yes.
Yeah.
So does it mean that when Guru is pleased, then the um, then the person is satisfied? Like what does it mean? Like getting satisfied by the devotional service itself. I just want to need more detail.
Well, the devotee is not looking to be recognized as a big devotee. And the devotee is satisfied by humbly remaining in a position of service. You can understand this if you read the book about Jayananda. Jayananda was a devotee, but he was very humble, and he would always take up services that nobody else wanted to do, like take the trash out and buy so many other things that other devotees would not want to do. So there's a book. I can give you the book and you can read it. Jayananda was a very, very humble person who always engaged in devotional service and did not ask for any recognition. And he was always very dedicated to Srila Prabhupada. And Prabhupada recognized him as a pure devotee. So there's a book about Jayananda. I can loan it to you, and you can read about him, and you'll see why he is so loved by other devotees and Srila Prabhupada. And I'll just give you one indication. Jayananda, somehow or other, uh, 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 was uh, uh, he became very, very sick, and his sickness was uh, a congenital disease that could not be healed. And at that time, he also received, with his mother or father died, and he got a large amount of money. Instead of using the money to somehow or other find a way to heal his problem of sickness, he gave the whole amount of money to Srila Prabhupada. And Prabhupada gave the money back and said, use this to sort of see if you can heal yourself. And Jayananda again gave the money back to Prabhupada and said, you can use this more significantly than myself. That's how he was. He was completely selfless in his execution of devotional service. And he did die. He did die of some kind of disease. But he never stopped being Krishna consciousness right up to the moment of death. So he was a very exceptional devotee. In fact, the devotees considered that he was the first devotee to attain pure devotional service in Krishna consciousness because he never asked for any recognition or any type of accolades. He simply was satisfied to do service. And he would do things that other devotees would normally stay away from doing, like take the trash out and many other menial services that most devotees avoid doing. That's the type of person he was. So if you want to read about him, I have a book about him. And that's you read it and you become very you feel very humbled by and very, let's say, overwhelmed by the purity of Jayananda. In fact, the devotees would think or thought that he was the first devotee to actually achieve the position of a pure devotee in ISKCON. Okay, so if you want to read that book, you just ask me, I'll loan you the book, but you
Yes,
have to get back to me.
yes, Maharaj. Thank you, Maharaj.
Haribo, all glories to Srila Prabhupada ki jai.
Sure.
Chant Hare Krishna today and be happy. All glories to Prabhupada.